Before we go deeper, notice what makes 5 psychological traps that keep average people average so misleading at first glance. Most people see the surface story and stop there. The value of this chapter is that it changes the lens, because once the frame is cleaner, the rest of the topic becomes much easier to understand honestly. When people hear the word average, they usually think of income, grades, or performance. But financial average is often a psychological outcome before it becomes a balance sheet outcome. It comes from repeated choices that feel normal, socially approved, and emotionally safe. That is why so many capable people stay stuck. The trap is not always effort. It is often the operating system behind the effort. The danger is that these traps rarely announce themselves as self-sabotage. They feel reasonable at the moment they act on you. That purchase feels deserved. That delay feels cautious. That comparison feels informative. That new cost feels manageable. Because the trap feels normal up close, the long-term damage stays hard to notice until years have passed. This is what makes the topic important. People who get trapped financially are not necessarily careless or unintelligent. They may be disciplined at work, thoughtful in relationships, and highly competent in complex domains. But money sits close to identity, fear, time, and status. That makes it one of the easiest places for hidden psychology to overpower logic. The first trap is present bias. Present bias is the tendency to overvalue immediate relief and undervalue future benefit. It's why saving later feels acceptable, why investing tomorrow sounds fine, and why spending now can feel emotionally obvious, even when the long-term cost is clear on paper. What present bias really does is make the future feel endlessly negotiable. Future you can save more, future you can recover, future you can start investing once life settles down. That story buys comfort now, but it also forces the future version of you to keep solving problems the present version refused to confront. If you master nothing else, reducing present bias already improves a huge share of money behavior. Wealth building depends on delayed benefit. If the present always gets a louder vote than the future, the balance sheet almost has no chance to become exceptional. It will keep returning to the easiest emotional option available now. That opening distinction may sound subtle, but it is doing most of the heavy lifting. Once the frame changes, the rest of the story stops feeling random. You begin to see that what looked ordinary on the surface was already shaping the financial result underneath. Now we move from headline to mechanism. This is where the topic stops feeling like a slogan and starts behaving like a real system. The later outcomes stop looking mysterious and start looking like the natural result of specific incentives and habits. The second trap is status imitation. People copy the visible signals of financial success long before they have built the invisible structure that supports it. Better car, better neighborhood, better travel, better brand language. The surface arrives before the system. That sequence is lethal because it spends capital on appearance before capital has had time to become protective. Status imitation is especially tricky because it can feel socially intelligent. You want to fit the peer group, signal progress, and avoid looking like the only person not upgrading. But money obeys math more than social comfort. The balance sheet does not care whether the spending looked normal among your peers. It only records what was left to compound. The third trap is certainty addiction. Many people refuse to move unless the outcome feels guaranteed. They want certainty before investing, certainty before starting a business, certainty before changing strategy, certainty before reducing a bad habit. But wealth usually grows under conditions of managed uncertainty, not guaranteed clarity. This trap keeps average people average because the world does not hand out perfect financial timing. Markets move before you feel ready. Opportunities are messy. Good enough systems beat perfect plans that never begin. The search for certainty creates elegant delay, and elegant delay is still delay. People treat inaction as neutral because it looks calm. But refusing to act has a cost too. Cash drag, miscompounding, delayed ownership, weaker runway, smaller optionality. Certainty addiction makes those costs invisible by framing non-movement as safe, even when the long horizon makes non-movement one of the riskier choices available. These traps often collaborate. Someone spends to look established, then delays investing because they no longer feel financially ready. The appearance of success increases while the structure of success gets postponed. That combination is one of the cleanest formulas for staying respectable on the surface and average underneath. Once the mechanism is visible, a lot of confusing money behavior suddenly makes sense. It stops looking like chaos and starts looking like the predictable result of time horizon, incentives, and the way people position capital under pressure. This is the point where the cost becomes real. Up to now, the idea can still sound abstract, but Chapter 3 forces the issue into ordinary life. That matters because financial damage is usually underestimated until it gets translated into trade-offs, pressure, and lost future options. The fourth trap is identity protection. People defend the version of themselves they already know, even when that identity is financially costly. I am not an investing person. I am just bad with money. I am the generous one. I deserve nice things because I work hard. Those stories feel personal, which makes them harder to challenge than raw numbers. This trap matters because once a behavior becomes part of identity, changing it starts to feel like betrayal rather than growth. Someone is not just spending too much, they are being who they believe they are. That is why budget advice often fails. It argues with arithmetic, while the real loyalty is sitting inside self-story. The fifth trap is social comparison. People do not judge their money in a vacuum. They judge it against siblings, colleagues, friends, neighbors, and whatever the internet has decided is normal this week. That comparison distorts goals. Instead of building the structure their own life needs, they build the image their environment seems to reward. This is especially damaging because wealth often looks slow in the middle years. Reserves growing, investments compounding, debt falling, fixed costs staying controlled. Those are real wins, but they can feel unimpressive next to visible consumption. Social comparison trains people to interpret quiet strength as underperformance. Identity protection and comparison work together more than people realize. You compare yourself to the world, then adopt identities that justify why you should spend, delay, or avoid the uncomfortable work of building assets. Over time, the story and the environment reinforce each other until average starts to feel inevitable instead of manufactured. If you step back, all 5 traps point to the same weakness: letting emotion, culture, and self-story outrank structure. The traps differ in flavor, but they produce similar results: less saving, less investing, more delay, more visible spending, more financial fragility hidden inside a life that still looks reasonably successful. This is why the damage is usually larger than the headline suggests. It is rarely just a number problem. It becomes a freedom problem, a margin problem, and eventually a future options problem. That is what makes the cost so easy to ignore early and so frustrating later. At this stage, the useful move is reframe rather than blame. The goal is not to admire the problem or panic about it. The goal is to replace a weak money model with one that produces better choices consistently once real life gets involved. The first reframe is encouraging. You do not need a completely new personality to escape these traps. You need better systems. Systems matter because they reduce the number of moments where psychology gets to improvise. The less often each trap gets a live vote, the less damage it can do over time. That is why pre-decision matters so much. Decide the savings rate before the raise arrives. Decide the investing transfer before the paycheck lands. Decide the lifestyle ceiling before the peer pressure appears. Pre-decision is powerful because it lets your better judgment act earlier than your weaker moods. Another reframe is to change the scoreboard. Most traps survive because people track the wrong things. They track visible comfort, social rank, and current flexibility. Better scoreboards track runway, ownership income, investable surplus, fixed cost pressure, and asset growth. When the scoreboard improves, the psychology often follows. You also do not need to pretend you are above these traps. In fact, strong money systems are often built by people who know exactly how they fail. If you know you drift, automate. If you know comparison gets you, reduce exposure. If certainty traps you, use rules that favor small, consistent motion instead of giant, perfect decisions. One of the most underrated shifts is learning to respect quiet progress. Average people often chase visible proof too early because quiet progress does not feel emotionally rewarding enough. But quiet progress is where resilience lives. Once you can tolerate a season where your life looks ordinary and your structure gets stronger, your odds of building real wealth rise sharply. That is the big idea. Average is not destiny. Average is often the default result of unmanaged psychology. Once structure enters the picture, the traps lose some of their power. Not because you became superhuman, but because the environment around your choices got smarter. Once the model gets cleaner, the behavior can get cleaner too. Most financial progress accelerates only after people stop asking the wrong question and start organizing money around the right one. Better framing usually arrives before better outcomes. Now the idea needs to become operational. Insight only matters if it changes what the next dollars do, what the next rule becomes, or how the system behaves the next time life gets noisy. That is where strong financial content separates itself from interesting commentary. Start with honesty. Which trap gets you most often? Present bias, status imitation, certainty addiction, identity protection, social comparison? Naming the dominant trap matters because vague self-awareness rarely changes behavior. Specific awareness gives you something concrete to design around. Then automate whatever the trap most frequently attacks. If present bias steals future money, automate savings. If status imitation steals raises, route part of every increase straight into assets. If certainty addiction causes delay, use standing rules that keep money moving even when confidence is imperfect. It also helps to reduce exposure to inputs that inflame the trap. Less comparison fuel, less speculative content, less lifestyle benchmarking, less emotional financial noise. The more your attention is shaped by unstable signals, the harder it is to keep a stable system intact. A monthly structural review is another powerful tool. Not a shame ritual, a systems check. What strengthened? What leaked? What did the traps try this month? A short review keeps the system close enough to reality that corrections happen while they are still small and inexpensive. And finally, build a new identity around process. Not around looking rich, but around becoming structurally stronger. Someone who funds assets first. Someone who respects future optionality. Someone who can tolerate quiet compounding. That identity is much less fragile than one built on display. The best way to make this stick is not to overhaul your whole personality in one weekend. Install one anti-trap rule at a time, a savings transfer that defeats present bias, a raise allocation rule that defeats status imitation, a review rhythm that defeats drift. Small structural wins are how a different financial identity becomes believable. There is another practical rule here. Make the right choice easier than the wrong one. Hide the savings account from daily temptation. Automate the investment. Add friction to status purchases, reduce the media that triggers comparison. The more the environment supports your better judgment, the less often each trap gets a fresh chance to take over. So the 5 psychological traps that keep average people average are powerful, but they are not unbeatable. Once you see them clearly, you can start designing around them, and that is when average stops feeling like your natural ceiling. If this changed how you think about money, subscribe. We publish 3 videos every week. That is the whole WealthLogic point. Money gets easier to respect once it is organized on purpose. The people who win long-term usually are not responding better to one moment. They are running a better system every month, even when nothing dramatic seems to be happening.